you have some perspective on the Second World War?
Yes. I was a 16-year-old pre-college student in 1938 when the Germans and the French and English were negotiating for Munich, and I was very vociferous in arguing at that time that there was no way that Germany would ever adhere to any agreement that they signed, and that if the Sudetenland were given to Germany, it would result in war.
What led you to that conclusion?
My readings on what Hitler had been doing since the day that he became the premier of Germany.
That Hitler could not be trusted.
Every word that he gave, he violated. He entered the forbidden areas of the Versailles Treaty with impunity as soon as he realized that the other powers were not going to respond to his violation of Versailles. He kept on increasing and increasing his violations until there was nothing anymore to violate. He just controlled what he wanted to control, and that was it.
What was the interest of Britain and France at the time of the appeasement through Czechoslovakia?
Their main thrust was to stay out of war. And they felt that after having experienced the horror of World War I, they wanted to do almost anything to avoid a second war without realizing that the steps that they were taking were actually going to lead to another war.
How did the steps lead to another war?
The fact that when Hitler would overtake the Sudetenland, which was the only area that had ample protective equipment to prevent an advance by the German army, they opened up the whole Eastern Europe to Hitler.
And so by appeasing Hitler with Czechoslovakia, they thought at the moment that they were avoiding war, but what did it ultimately wind up doing to them?
They wound up in World War II because they had further agreements with Poland, and when Poland was invaded, they had no alternative other than to enter the war.
And how was their position affected as a result of the appeasement of their enemy?
Well, there is a very, very serious doubt that Germany would have advanced against Czechoslovakia with the fortifications that the Czechs had developed in the Sudetenland. The terrain was very difficult for tanks, and tanks were the main thrust of the German blitzkrieg. So if the Sudetenland were not handed to Hitler on a platter, there is major doubt by many experts that Hitler could have advanced eastward.
In attempting to avoid a war for political purposes, they wound up in a much more perilous position later on.
Yes, that usually will happen if weakening by giving in, a country should realize that they're starting the ball rolling for more requests and more advances, and before they know it, they're at a defensive position instead of a previous, perhaps, offensive position.
Well, we know that the Nazi war criminals from Goebbels' communications ministry were transferred to Egypt, Johann von Leer, to teach the Arab world how to use Jew hatred as a uniting nationalist cause, as a pan-Arab uniting nationalist movement, which persists today, the vilification of Israel and Zionism. And of course, it was easy through the inherent hatred of Jews in the Quran, made it easy to make the Jews vilified. What position do you see Israel in today vis-a-vis this appeasement, Israel and the United States, in trying to avoid war with their Islamist enemies?
In my opinion, the request by the major powers to have Israel return to 1967 borders is the beginning of the similar situation of Sudetenland. Israel's major protection as of now is the large buffer that it has between the physical presence of the Palestinian leadership and its present control of land.
The West Bank.
Without the control of this land, if the Palestinian forces were right next to the main heart of Israel, which is the Tel Aviv corridor, then there would be no protection from the missiles. The missiles would enable the Palestinians to prevent Israeli planes from taking off to bomb them, and it would prevent the Israeli forces from actually becoming forceful, because the only way they could do it is by movement from their homes, and there'll be missiles flying over and they won't be able to be transported to proper positions.
How do you view the West's perception, Western Europe, United Nations, how do you view their perception of the security needs of Israel vis-a-vis maintaining control of this West Bank?
Well, I draw what I call the shoe on the other foot concept. Would Great Britain want to place itself into a position with, for example, Scotland, which wants to break away from Great Britain? Would they want to place themselves into a vulnerable position where Scotland would be right at their heels at the moment that they would divest control of the area that they now control in Scotland? The same with the United States. If, God forbid, there were a problem with Canada, would we want to place ourselves into a position where we gave up possession of certain parts of our northern country to Canada? Or let's suppose we had a problem with Mexico, and Mexico wanted the southern states, which they lost in the Mexican War. would we want to give control of those states to Mexico? That's what Britain and France should be asking themselves. Would they do what they're asking Israel to do under the same set of circumstances?
How do we know what the establishment of a Palestinian state would mean for Israel's safety in the future? Do the Palestinians want just a territorial concession and then leave Israel be?
Well, that answer is very easy when you consider the fact that in 1964, before Israel had the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem, and those areas were controlled by Jordan and Egypt pursuant to the 1949 armistice, they created the Palestinian Liberation Organization. What were they trying to liberate? They were trying to liberate Palestine. So the only area that they were trying to liberate was the area of Israel itself, which they consider to be Palestine, because in their clause 24 of their 64 charter, 3 years before Israel had the West Bank, they specifically excluded Jordan's control of the West Bank and Egypt's control of Gaza from their liberation of Palestine. So if they, 3 years before Israel had the West Bank, came forward with a document which they have never changed, to destroy the charter, to destroy Israel, and the charter which declared that the establishment of Israel was illegal and void, I'd like someone to point out one actual step which would indicate that they have changed their thinking in these 40-some-odd years.
Now, was this something that was just done as a political platform to help the party get in power, and has since been abandoned in terms of...
It had nothing to do with power. It had strictly to do with the destruction of Israel. The document is very specific on it.
And did they have an obligation to change that under any of their agreements with Israel?
Oh, they sure did have an obligation. The obligation began with Arafat's September 1993 letter to then Prime Minister Rabin, right before the signing of the DPO, the Declaration of DOP, Declaration of Principles. Arafat wrote this letter in which he said that all of the clauses of the charter which were contrary to his letter to Rabin were no longer operative or will no longer be operative, and obligated himself in that letter to have the Palestinian National Council acknowledge and vote for everything that he said in his letter. It took more than 2.5 years for the Palestinian National Council to meet. And this was before the 1967 war. This was 1996, when they were now obligated to annul clauses in the charter pursuant to Oslo II. That was Chapter 31, Clause paragraph 9, which specifically said within 2 months of the inauguration of the charter, which inauguration was March 7 of 1996, the charter had to be annulled.
So this is, I don't know, 15 years ago. When people think today, okay, Hamas has a charter which is sworn to the destruction of Israel, but not Fatah or not the Palestinian Authority on the West Bank, people say, well, if we leave Gaza out of it, couldn't Israel make peace with, or to rephrase it, isn't the Palestinian Authority willing to accept Israel as a safe neighbor?
The Palestinian Authority is the outgrowth of the PLO. And in addition, there is the Fatah Charter of 1964-65, also before Israel had the West Bank, which declares virtually the same language but in much more paragraphs the destruction of Israel. So the Fatah's the other party, and that's Abbas' party. He helped found the Fatah. So what he says in English doesn't correspond to the facts that exist in Arabic.
President Obama and the State Department are pressing Israel now to make concessions towards a Palestinian state. How good an idea is that for the public to support?
The public should not support any change at this moment in the physical aspect of the control that exists. And the reason is very, very simple. There is no fact, or there are no series of facts which would indicate a change in the mindset to destroy Israel. As a matter of fact, after the 73 Yom Kippur War, the Palestinian leadership decided that there was no way that Israel could be defeated in a frontal attack, and the Palestinian National Council, the legislative body of the Palestinians, came out with its 1974 resolution, which declared in Article 2 of this resolution the new concept of destroying Israel in phases. And this clause very carefully spells out, take what you can, develop your infrastructure, and then go on to the next piece until you place Israel in such a weakened position that you can then ask the surrounding Arab countries to join you in defeating and destroying Israel. Almost nobody is aware of this 1974 document. It has been stated and restated by some of the Arab leaders. As a matter of fact, in September of 1985, right after Arafat signed Oslo II in Washington, he got, the same day, he got on Jordan TV and made that specific statement that we are going to beat Israel in phases. Everyone knows we cannot beat them in one fell swoop.
It's popular in certainly in Jewish circles to be in favor of peace and the peace process through a Palestinian state. But based on what you're saying, this secession of strategic Israel-controlled land today would only lead to more trouble, more problems for Israel. How would it be possible, do you think, for Jews and other people concerned, Christians and the secular public, to break from this goose-stepping, conventional wisdom?
Unfortunately, it is a lack of facts and lack of knowledge. I meet with people and I discuss this, and their eyes open. They said they had no idea that this existed. And I bring the documents with me. I don't talk from the hip. I show the actual documents. And when I lecture, and I give every person at the lecture the series of documents, and I talk and have them turn pages, and I show them the actual verbiage. And at the end, people come over to me and say they had no knowledge of this. How can a person have knowledge of this when he gets up, has breakfast, goes to the office, is in the office the rest of the day, comes home for dinner, and then watches TV or reads? Where does he pick this up? He can only pick it up through research. It's not in the papers. You can read the New York Times 24 hours a day and you won't find one word on the 74 document or the charter or the failure on the part of the Palestinians to modify the charter, even though they went through several steps trying to show that they did modify it. I've offered $100,000 to be given to 4 different American and Israeli charities. If someone could come forward with a modified charter, nobody has been able to do it. So it's lack of knowledge, and it's unbelievable how people are making judgments on what should or should not be done without facts to sustain what they are trying to say or communicate.
Are you asking the public to break from the conventional wisdom and this administration policy that the creation of a Palestinian state will lead to a safe Israel, to safety and stability for the Middle East?
I simply state that if the people read the specific documents and ask anyone to come forward with a document which would indicate that those documents are no longer viable, then they could revert to their present position. But I do not understand how anybody with any degree of intelligence can read the charter, the steps that were promulgated by the Palestinian leadership, which bamboozled President Clinton, Prime Minister Netanyahu, and the world into thinking that they changed the charter when not one word has ever been changed. I find it impossible to believe that people would not see the light of day if they were presented with these documents, had the chance to read them and understand them, and ask for an annulment, which has never come forward. And even if there were an annulment based upon every violation, when the 2000 Intifada began, there is no question that it was state-sponsored. So even if there were an annulment, which there weren't, their sponsorship of the Intifada, which caused more Israeli civilian deaths per year than in all of the years before Oslo, that speaks for itself. If not for the wall that was added to protect Israel, there would have been substantially more deaths by civilians from terrorism. So the facts speak for themselves.
How would the global jihad movement be affected by a victory over Israel and a reconquering of Jerusalem? What would that do for the global jihad movement affecting the West and America?
I'm not able to project it reasonably because I have not thought it through, but as a matter of logic, if it can be shown that terrorism can be stopped by not nurturing it, by giving more land, that certainly would have an affirmative effect throughout the world.
Would you view it as administration policy to try and make Israel look bad, to try and separate American support for Israel based on
I don't think that is a concept which is being promoted as a matter of course. The effect is that, but I don't think that's a motivation.
If Israel were somehow to be vilified in the future as going against U.S. policy or U.S. interest, how would it affect the image and treatment of Jews in the West based on what happened in Germany and in Europe towards the Jews depicted as trouble for the state?
That would be absolutely contrary to fact. It can be shown, and it would be shown, that Israel's stand actually prevented the United States and Europe from being in a worse position, because if Israel were actually destroyed, there wouldn't be one non-Muslim area in the whole of North Africa and the Middle East, and the whole south of Europe would be vulnerable to hundreds of millions of Muslims. So in actuality, it is the protection of the southern part of Europe which is one of the real major reasons why Israel should remain the sole force to protect their area.
In the World War II era, the Japanese Americans were interned into concentration camps as enemies of the state. Did you see that as conceivable in the case that Israel were perceived to be an enemy of America? In a war, if America were drawn into a war and Israel were not on America's side,
there is no conceivable way of the United States being in a war with Israel on the other side.
Why do you feel that way?
Our interests are intertwined. Our protection of the United States, Israel's protection of the United States, is to Israel's benefit. There's no reason why Israel would ever take a contrary position to the United States.
Is there a taboo you think that we ought to overcome in criticizing the global Islamist political movement that Jews are particularly sensitive to as a minority in protecting our religious security and sanctity, that we should look beyond in criticizing the global Islamist political movement?
The truth always should command the moves of a person or a country. The truth of the matter is that in almost every area where there is combat, Muslims are involved. That speaks for itself. It's Muslim against Muslim, the Shia against Sunni, or Muslims against Buddhists, Muslims in the Philippines. It's all over. There are areas in Europe where the police dare not tread. That speaks for itself.
But is this Muslim belligerence a defensive belligerence that they're trying to defend against persecution, from the Buddhists or the Christians or the Zoroastrians or around the world? Are they just fighting to defend themselves, or what's the motivation?
The motivation is that there is enough movement in the Muslim world that they want to control the world. And how great this movement is, I don't think anybody is capable of saying. But there is a substantial movement in the Muslim world to take over every conceivable corner of the world. And that also speaks for itself. I don't know any country, I don't know any people who are trying to do anything to the Muslims.
Not the Christians in Africa?
No place.
And so you're saying that there's something inherent in the culture today?
It's the culture, it's the Quran itself. It's the misreading, or perhaps not the misreading, I don't know which it is, of the Quran, which promotes religious fervor of such a nature that they want everybody to adhere to Sharia.
And so how do you feel politically people should respond, both in culture and in requesting a policy from their political leaders?
To make sure that their political leaders act accordingly. Self-preservation should really be the name of the game. And if a leader finds that any movement is getting out of control, or any movement is in the process of trying to change their country, that they certainly should prevent it from happening.
And how do you suppose we ought to be doing that in ways that we aren't today?
And are you talking about the United States?
Yeah, the United States.
Well, I think that we should call a spade a spade. If there is something in the nature of the Fort Hood incident, that it should be termed what it is and not what some people would like it to be.
An act of political terror.
That's exactly what yelling Allah Akbar speaks for itself.
What's your concern for the future of the West if we don't heed this warning at this stage?
The future of the West is going to destroy itself if we don't face the problems right now. We are too prone to do what we think is the right thing when the right thing is the wrong thing. Everybody should be enabled to practice what he wants to practice. Any attempt by any entity to try to force a different type of practice in a country should be stopped immediately. That is self-preservation.
Do you suppose that the lessons of World War II should factor into our deciding how to handle our times?
The lessons of the World War II were properly learned by the United States and allies because of the fact that we stayed in the two main adherents of that war, Japan and Germany. We stayed in those countries until we unilaterally were satisfied that they no longer had the concept of conquer, and as a result, Germany and Japan are two of our major allies.
But it was only through victory, complete military victory.
It wasn't the complete victory, it was the fact that we stayed there, we engendered some of our way of life into their thinking, and they began to realize that peace, real peace, meant not trying to enlarge oneself, but to live within one's borders and to do the right thing.
Well, if we hadn't had a military victory, or to say if the Allies hadn't had a military victory over the Axis powers, do you suppose that they would have seen the light in our superior political or cultural society?
I don't know if we'd be here today if we had not defeated them.
And how would this apply to what we should be doing towards global Islamism?
Face it and make certain that it does not increase in intensity in our own countries.